Welcome back to season 2 of the High Floor Football Show. I am Sam Wagman, and you can find me on Twitter at Swagman95. I am joined by my co-host, Jay Arsh, who swears that this is the year that he finally gets back into Twitter about fantasy football. But, since we're here, Jay, why don't you tell everyone where they can find you and what's been going on in your life since we were last on the air back in September?
Well, you can find me right below at J Arsht, my first last name. I like to keep it easy like that. Also a 95 baby like Sam there, so could have put that 95 at the end. But I'm good, man. I'm good. It has been a while since September. You and I haven't talked since September. Just kidding. Sam and I talk all the time, but we've been cooking up takes, all season long, getting ready for our comeback on this season. We've got some good guests lined up, and I'm excited, man. I think we all know what you and I have been through in the past couple months. I mean, we went through heartbreak in the Super Bowl. We have recovered, and we're back on. Fortunately, we won't have to talk about that today.
Yeah, well, we have gotten some time away from football to regroup after the crushing Super Bowl loss. But now that I think about it, the Eagles were definitely destined to lose. As I look back and see that 90% of the universe was on the Eagles to beat the Chiefs. So I saw everyone, and it was everyone from Joe Schmo to Nick in your office. Everyone wanted the Eagles to beat the Chiefs. And it was one of the few times that I really have never seen Patrick Mahomes be an underdog in his career. So, that was really painful to see. But here we are. It's a few weeks later. Jonathan Gannon is gone. Shane Steichen is gone. In their place are the newly hired Sean Desai, hired today, and Brian Johnson, who was promoted from within. So that's good. But Look, you and I are both into the best ball streets. Even at this early time, you and I have both been drafting quite a bit. So, Underdog Fantasy is the best place for you to hone your fantasy football drafting skills, even in February, if you're a psycho like Jay and I are. The big board with rookies is out and live, as well as the little board, which is a 2 max but still at $3 instead of the $10 for the big board. And you can use code HFF for a 100% deposit match on your first deposit up to $100. Come draft with Jay and I today over at Underdog Fantasy, the best place to draft best ball teams, and use prop plays if you're so inclined, like I am most of the time. So, obviously getting back to the Super Bowl a little bit, it serves us right for being so optimistic. Now that we've had the time off, though, it's a perfect chance to get into a topic that you love a lot more than I do, but I'm still into it as well. I got my hand in a bunch of leagues. Dynasty. So, everyone loves to start off the startup season by talking about risers and fallers. So we're going to go position by position and talk our favorite guys. So, let's get right into it with the quarterback spot. And Jay, who is your first riser?
Well, I have to say, he's not necessarily my favorite guy. You did take my favorite guy, but I knew it was going to happen, so I had to come up with another one. And we're thinking about, some of the guys who rose and fell the most in Dynasty. So not necessarily my favorite or my least favorite, but just guys where, the value changed so much over the course of the year. My quarterback's Justin Fields. I mean, I don't think that's any big surprise for anybody that's been playing fantasy, playing Dynasty, playing, watching football, anything. Justin Fields lit up the field this year, no pun intended. Finished QB5 in points per game, averaging over 20 points per game. He had 8 QB1 weeks. He really took people to the playoffs, took people to some championships during that time. He, changed people's seasons actually mid-season. So, in 2022, he had a little over 2,000 yards, 17 touchdowns, 11 interceptions, but it was the rushing, that really scored points for Justin Fields. He had over 1,100 rushing yards, 8 touchdowns, and still completed 60% of his passes. Talking about Dynasty, though, I mean, I just tweeted out a couple days ago, thinking about startups, thinking about where guys are going to go. Startups, especially Superflex, which most are in Dynasty, it's going to be quarterback heavy. And I think Fields should be going in the top 10. I have him going 108 right now in my startup rankings in a tier with him and Trevor Lawrence and Deshaun Watson. And, that's pretty good company compared to where he was last year. Like I referenced earlier, I mean, he finished QB5 only behind some of the big names like Jalen Hurts, Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Joe Burrow. can't get much better than that for the age that he's at, and for really what the Bears put around him. They didn't give him any help. So when I'm thinking about it in terms of dynasty, you could use keep cut trade, any of these trade sites that people, tend to put in their trades in dynasty, especially this time of year. And I'm not a huge keep cut trade guy, but I think you can really use it to your advantage. If somebody else uses it, check there, see what he's going for. Fields is lined up pretty much with the 101. Not a huge surprise there, because I think that we would take him over, the Bryce Young, CJ Strouds of the world. And, Bijan Robinson is kind of the consensus one right now. But if you knew you were getting Justin Fields, I don't think that would be a huge surprise for him to go 101. The big narrative with him, really, which is confusing to me, is, is he really going to get better as a passer? Is he going to improve as a passer? I mean, coming into the league, I thought Justin Fields was a pretty damn good passer and had the athleticism too, which he flashed this past season. But in college, I mean, his sophomore season, 2019 at Ohio State, 41 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, and a 67% completion percentage. Tell me that guy's not a passer. A 41-3 touchdown to interception ratio. He's a little wild. Junior year, he didn't play too much, only 8 games, had 22 touchdowns, 6 interceptions, and upped his completion percentage to 70%. So Justin Fields can pass. It's just the Bears really have not given him much to work with. And fortunately, they've got a lot of ammo in the draft. The Bears own the first pick, the 53rd pick, the 64th pick, the 103, 133. Realistically, I think most people would say Bears are trading out of that first pick so they could have even more ammo and hopefully get Justin Fields some things to work with. So number one in cap space as well. I forgot to mention that the Bears have the most cap space going into free agency. So I'm hoping this Bears offense is going to look much different next year. And that being said, I think Justin Fields should be, going in the top 10 of startup drafts. And I think he should be valued very highly in dynasty leagues. And he's not going to be cheap. We all know that, but he's also not going to get much cheaper, I don't think, than he is right now. I think he's only going to go up from here. You saw what happened with Jalen Hurts last year when you connect him with A.J. Brown and some of the dots that the Eagles did. So Justin Fields is my biggest riser, aside from Jalen Hurts, who you're about to mention.
Yeah, and I got to dive right into Jalen Hurts as well, because, I saw someone post a very interesting poll the other day, and it was our good buddy Ben Wilbransky over at the 33rd Team and Betting Pros. And Ben had a good opinion on this. Are we valuing Justin Fields in startups the way we value Jalen Hurts last year in startups? As in, do we expect Justin Fields to take the same leap, third-year leap that Jalen Hurts did in his third year? So I think it's a good point of reference to, keep in mind that for the Bears, last year was a complete rebuilding year for them. They weren't expected to compete at all. I think they had 3 wins, right? So
I don't even know. I think so.
So 3 or 4 wins. They weren't expected to compete at all. So you have to think that Fields is in for a passing improvement this year, as long as they keep him. We still don't know exactly what happens with the 101. We don't know if some team trades up to get it. I have to imagine that they wouldn't have done what they did last year if they didn't have some belief that Fields could be the guy going forward. And I think he showed enough with the extremely limited weapons that he had last year. And obviously he almost set the rushing record last season. So, Fields is dynamite as a fantasy player. The football player Fields, still a little bit of a question to me, but there's one thing that's not a question, and that's how good Jalen Hurts is. And we finally got to see it last season. He put up a literal MVP caliber type season. Would have most likely been the MVP had he not gotten a SC joint injury at the end of the season, which caused him to miss a couple games there. So, it was a big shame that he missed that time there. But I do think that he showed so much, and he showed so much positive for us to see. He threw so well, and he really did everything he needed to do. 22 touchdowns, very limited turnovers. Obviously, the biggest turnover of the season came in the Super Bowl, but we're passing over that. But he threw for 3,700 yards. He had the most attempts. He only had 28 more attempts than he had in 2021, yet he had 565 more yards. That's huge. He upped his completion percentage by 5 points, upped his yards per attempt by 0.7 points. He rushed for, a similar amount, 782 in 2021 to 760 in 2022, but he added 3 touchdowns on the ground, getting up to 13. And the most important thing, he ranked first in fantasy points per game with 25.6, and that was up from 21.4 in 2021. Jalen Hurts showed that he can really be the guy. Howie Roseman is the real champ here. He built around Jalen Hurts to the point where it was nigh impossible for Jalen to succeed as long as he took the step forward that he needed to. So Robbie wants me to talk about Eric Bieniemy and how Washington is going to get Lamar. I don't think that happens at all. But we can save that for a little bit later in the show for sure, Robbie, if you stick around. Good to see you, buddy. Going back to Jalen Hurts, I do think that if there was one negative, it's that we really didn't see him handle pressure that well. And we saw him have struggles when rolling out to the left side, and teams kind of keyed in on that a little bit in the playoffs, especially in the Super Bowl. We saw him have a little bit of a struggle there, but he had so many good passing weapons that he was always able to get the ball out in time. So Hurts is going to be my biggest riser by far. He's a bona fide top 3 option. Look, I have no problem taking him at QB1 in Dynasty if you want to, and I did it myself in a startup already this year.
I think there's definitely an argument for him to go, first overall, top 3 for sure, and especially with the extension that's about to come through. Jalen's going to get paid. He's going to be locked up in Philadelphia, and I hate to say locked up in Philadelphia, but he's going to be locked in Philadelphia, and so are his weapons. I mean, A.J. Brown's under contract, Devontae Smith's under contract, extended Dallas Goedert before the season. The Eagles are set up well for the future, and Jalen Hurts is going to be the focal point of that. A guy, Jalen Hurts took a big step. A guy who took a big step back for us in Dynasty and just in general, Russell Wilson. I mean, we all know what happened. He's my biggest faller here. Career lows in completion percentage, touchdowns, QBR, second worst in his career in interceptions, yards per attempt. I mean, pretty much everything about Russell Wilson went down the drain last season. And we all know what happened, man. Russ tried to cook and he started a fire. And unfortunately, just didn't go well. We all invested in him. We all invested in the weapons in Denver, especially if you're playing a lot of best ball dynasty leagues. You had pieces of Denver, and it was disappointing to see it go the way that it did. Right now, he's being valued as QB 17, behind guys like Goff, Pickett, Daniel Jones. Again, referencing just the keep cut trade thing. That's kind of what a lot of the casual dynasty players will use. So just trying to find that range. 34 years old, going to be 35 in November, so he'll play pretty much the whole season at 34. And being valued again in a trade around like an early 2023 second. Which, isn't that crazy, especially if you're a contender, if you needed a quarterback. And this is kind of a conversation Sam and I had when we were putting this show together was, we don't want to just pick these fallers as guys to just kind of, bag on the whole time. It's really like, is there an opportunity at all here in Dynasty? And for Russell Wilson, I really think there is, because it's gotten so low where can it get much worse? They added Sean Payton, who Russ apparently was texting Drew Brees for weeks trying to, convince him to go to Denver, which is just a funny
That's
thing.
wild. I hadn't heard that. Is that actually true?
That's what I heard. I heard Russell Wilson lives next to Drew Brees and had been bugging Drew Brees to talk to Sean Payton about how well this marriage could work, apparently. Again, like I said, your contending team in Dynasty, I don't think making a move for Russ, or at least seeing what the price is a bad move for you. Things are so low that you might as well throw out a feeler and see what you can get for him. He averaged 15 points per game last year. I mean, that's about as low as it's going to get for a guy like Russell Wilson and really any quarterback that you want to be using in Superflex, because then you get into the conversation of, do I even play a position player instead of that quarterback? So, again, Russell Wilson, opportunity. Not a huge fan of him in general, but the value's low. And when the value's low, you might as well see what you can get and see if it gets any higher. So Russell Wilson is my faller, but hopefully he picks it back up.
Now, I'm surprised that you chose Russell Wilson as your faller, and I'm obviously not now because I knew before. But you're so high on guys like Jerry Jeudy. I thought you would have Russ in that net neutral area. I like Russ, honestly. I think his value's never been lower, and this is the perfect time to buy low on him. With
Because I like
offensive
Jerry Jeudy
guru
does
Sean.
not have anything to do with Russell Wilson.
Don't worry. I'm just trying to find a way to mess with you about Jeudy. But I think that Russ's value has never been lower, like you also said. And I do think that with Peyton coming in, with the fact that he's turned everybody into, fantasy relevant players back when he was in New Orleans. And I do think Russ started to play generally better after Hackett got fired. And I don't know if I buy into all that stuff last year about, Russ had his own office and, this, that, and the other. I do want to talk about a story that I heard from I can't remember who I heard it from at this point, but there was a guy that Russ was very friendly with, and he was almost like a guru of sorts. Tony Mowat. I don't know if you heard this story.
What is that? Is like Alex Guerrero?
No, he was the guy who was behind Russ. He was it was like a motivator type of thing, and he instilled Russ always stay positive, no negative emotions, none of this.
Only unlimited.
That's where the that's where all this, Broncos country, let's ride, and we got this, guys, and all the cringy, positive TikToks that Russ posted and stuff like that. So and Tony Mowat very sadly passed away of a brain tumor in late 2021, but it stuck with Russ. He fully bought into the no negative emotions. Don't let anybody see any negative emotions. Don't even think about the negative emotions, and everything will come out positive for you. So I think, and everyone was bagging on Russ, for the Broncos country, let's ride, and, this, that, and the other in the huddle and everything like that. I think, it must have messed with Russ's psyche a little bit last year to have everyone kind of mocking him while he's just trying to honor one of his close friends who was a mentor and a big motivator to him as well. So I think that could have definitely played a part. And I do think him having the time off and being able to mesh with Sean Payton and his offensive philosophy will help a little bit.
Oh, sure. Don't get me wrong. I don't mind Russ going into 2023. It was more of the fall during 2022 that's now creating potential value, and he's got studs like Jerry Jeudy playing around him. So
and Cortland Sutton.
It's conversation for another time, though. Yes. Who is your quarterback faller?
Yeah, so my quarterback faller is none other than the Rams quarterback who kind of feels like he's dead at this point. I mean, we thought he would retire. He had all the injury issues. It's Matthew Stafford, and everyone thinks the Rams sold their soul to earn the Super Bowl a few years ago. I think they did too, because nothing went right for them last year. Stafford got injured, Kupp got injured, Sean McVay wanted to leave and had to be coaxed back. This was a career downfall for Stafford, though. He was on pace to match one of his passing attempts career's high, but he took a major downturn in passing yards. His yards per attempt was lower than it's been in all but one season of his career at 6.7 yards per attempt. His completion percentage was one of the highest it had been, but it was only in 9 games, and he had only passed for just over 2,000 yards in those 9 games. And if it wasn't for Cooper Kupp playing in 8 of those games, probably wouldn't have happened. There just wasn't much going right for the Rams, and it has to do with the fact that they adapted that, F them picks mantra the past few years. They have no first-round picks for the next few years. Sean McVay wants to leave and go to TV or Thailand or wherever he wants to go. They have nobody at receiver behind Cooper Kupp. The running back situation is very unsettled. And Stafford himself is coming off a spinal injury that could have been career threatening. We're still thinking he might retire at some point this offseason. It's definitely in the cards. So, Stafford's value, took a nosedive. And currently, according to Football Guys ADP, it's all the way down to 20 in our consensus rankings. I think it should be down in the mid to late 20s. I currently have him ranked as my QB 27. And, I don't know if you can really depend on Stafford at all. We're going to see what happens with Cooper Kupp, whether he comes, he's going to come back fine. He's only 29, maybe 30 at this point. And he'll come back. And he's the one saving grace that could save Stafford. But, Cup isn't going for 4,000 yards. You know, he's not a superhero. He can only go for, you know, as many yards as he's able to go for. And just outside of him, I don't think there's much hope for Stafford's dynasty value to rise anytime soon.
Yeah, I mean, as a dynasty player, I'm scared of a guy like Matthew Stafford. I mean, I think he did say he will come back next year, but I mean, with the injuries that he's had, you just never know. And he's somebody you want to really be ahead of, and unless you're really somebody who's competing and you don't have a deep quarterback room on your dynasty team, I mean, I'd be trying to sell Stafford as quickly as I could because, like you said, you just don't know what's going to happen tomorrow with him. My running back should be no surprise to anybody that pays attention to anything I say, which isn't a lot of people, but if anybody is listening that pays attention, it is King Ramondre Stevenson. Man, I love Ramondre. I was pretty early on him last year. Prior to last year, I was into Ramondre. I mean, he's just a guy that I've been trying to invest in, and it kind of finally came to fruition last year. Finished 7th in PPR, so top 10 finish, averaged a little over 14 points per game. 4th in receptions, 69 receptions, nice. Behind Christian McCaffrey, Eckler, Lenny. Yeah, I mean, you got to. 3rd in targets, 88 targets. And the big thing with Ramondre, the reason I kind of think people were a little later to him in Dynasty, or at least are a little worried about him, is the Patriots backfield thing. I that's part of it. Ramondre also doesn't look like the pass catching back that he is. He's 230 pounds, 6 foot. I mean, he's not the scat back type that you think is going to be an elite pass catcher, but he has that ability, and the Patriots are exercising that ability. Bill Belichick's referenced his pass blocking and his pass catching ability, comparing it to James White, which is pretty high praise from a guy like Belichick in terms of the role that James White played there for a long time. Again, understand the skepticism with the Patriots backfields in the past. Damian Harris is a free agent, so we got to pay attention to what happens with that, how the Patriots invest in the draft. They invested in a couple running backs last offseason, but I don't think they're really any difference makers necessarily, guys that could cut into Ramondre's role. But I also just think Ramondre is, kind of going to break that mold of the Patriots running back skepticism that we have. From weeks 3 to 13, Ramondre did not score under 12 points. Anybody that had Ramondre in fantasy, I mean, you're going to remember that type of stretch. He just was carrying your team. I mean, he was just as consistent as it gets. He's 25 years old, he will play a full season until he turns 26, in February. So the value right now on trade charts for the most part's around like RB10, RB11, which Rich, it's a little high. If something does happen to that Patriots backfield, if they add somebody, you might get screwed if you've already traded for Ramondre. There is that chance, and valuing him as a top 10 running back in Dynasty is high praise. But if you want to acquire him, it's about, the price seems to be around a late first, like 109 to 112 seems like the range where you could maybe get a Ramondre deal going. Again, on the, trade charts, that kind of thing, he's in between like Najee Harris and DeAndre Swift, which is kind of dangerous territory anyway. If you're investing in Najee or DeAndre, I think you should be kind of interested in investing in a guy like Ramondre because he's already shown he can produce at just as high or higher level than Swift, and just as high as a guy like Najee did in that same sort of volume role. So again, I understand the skepticism, but he's not a free agent until 2025, so he will be in New England for a little while longer. And there's just those things, that you see that kind of break the mold. I mean, Ramondre fumbled a couple times during the season, and Bill was asked about it, and he was like, yeah, I trust Ramondre. I'm going to go right back to him. And, like, those sort of things are things you haven't seen out of the Patriots. I mean, there's been times where Patriots running back fumbles, and you feel like you don't see the guy for the rest of the game. You don't see him next week. So I think Ramondre is going to break that mold. If I, have to say it, 10 times, I'll say it 10 times. I mean, I think he's a guy that you should invest in, understand the skepticism, but bake that into the trades that you're offering for him, and understand that ceiling, there's a chance that he doesn't hit that again. But if he can give you that stable RB2 production and with the ceiling of an RB1, I think he's worth a late first, especially in this kind of draft, if you can acquire him for that like 1.9, 1.12 range.
Yeah, I've been vacillating with Ramondre the last couple months, trying to figure out exactly where he lands. Because look, we all know Bill Belichick's history with the running back position, and it was more specifically Josh McDaniels, who's now obviously been gone. But this still we kind of saw a little bit of a split in kind of theory from how Belichick and Matt Patricia handled the running back room last year, as when Josh McDaniels was there in years prior. We saw Ramondre Stevenson get a little bit more work, but we still saw that kind of committee look kind of shine through a little bit, right? You know, we saw Damian Harris mix in plenty when he was healthy. Pierre Strong mixed in a little bit. Kevin Harris mixed in here and there. But I do think that the Patriots, and correct me on this, is Damian Harris a free agent this year?
He's a free agent.
I believe he is. I don't think the Patriots re-sign him.
It'll be interesting. Yeah, it's definitely part of that narrative with him. And like you said, you're absolutely right. At the beginning of the season, Damian Harris had his role, and it was a little bit like trying to figure out when Ramondre would get it. It just, to me, I think it felt like once Ramondre did get hold of it, Damian Harris cut back in a little bit when he was healthy, but Ramondre was used a whole different way than we've seen Patriots used in the past.
I think they were still splitting work a little bit, whenever that Harris was healthy. But I would definitely be remiss to say that Ramondre didn't take over the majority of that thing. I think it was like a 65 or 60-40 split whenever both of them were healthy and out in the field at the same time. So I'm definitely willing to buy back in at Ramondre in that. You know what? I'm getting the feeling that running back as a whole is just so iffy outside of like the top couple guys, and even then, it feels like fine. You have Bijan Robinson at RB1, probably. Like most people have him probably there. Like he's probably up there. But other than that, you got guys like Breece Hall, injured, ACL injury. And other things. Jonathan Taylor just had an injury-filled year. He's going to be behind a horrible O-line and a rookie quarterback and a new head coach. Not great. Kenneth Walker is good, but Seattle's offense leaves a little bit to be desired. Christian McCaffrey is still Christian McCaffrey. He's probably the guy you want if you're a contending team. Saquon Barkley, we don't know where he's going to go yet. Austin Eckler is starting to creep up there a little bit in age. And we saw the Chargers noticeably decrease his workload. And after that, there's not really a whole lot of guys that are safe, but there's one to me that's, kind of outside that range that I think should be up there. And I have him ranked inside my top 7 at this point. That is Josh Jacobs. And look, I mean, I'm as shocked as anybody that I am, coming to Josh Jacobs' defense after we all thought he was going to be thrown to the wolves last year. And, because it didn't look like Vegas wanted him at all. There was the possibility that they were going to run him into the ground. And there was also the possibility that Josh McDaniels would come in and institute a 4-man committee. Hands up. I thought that was going to happen. It did not happen. I looked like an idiot.
On people.
I looked like an idiot. I was carrying around the flag saying, like, look at me, look how smart I was after the first 2 games where he only had 8 and 9 fantasy points. And then came weeks 4, 5, and 7 where he had 34, 30, and 36 fantasy points and 6 touchdowns in those 3 games. I mean, the guy just looked like a man possessed. He was running all over guys. He was catching the ball all over the place. Josh McDaniels looked like he was finally using Josh Jacobs the right way. Now, we didn't get any more of those 30-point games. We did get the game against Seattle in week 12 where he had 48.3 fantasy points and 300 total yards. That's an aberration. But Josh Jacobs looked really good. And the best part about it is he's only 25 still. So look, he's still great. He looks really good. It's going to be really interesting to see what he does in free agency. I think he's the one that's going to lead the market in terms of compensation. I think, watching him, look, everyone expects Saquon to set it, but I think Josh Jacobs is going to get the longest term deal out of this free agent class because he's the youngest one there. I mean, he was drafted in 2019. He came into the league at, just under 21 years old. He just turned 25. I mean, there's a lot to be excited about with Josh Jacobs coming off a career year at 24 years old. and showing that he can be a 3-down back. And despite the fact that he has, a decent amount of tread he's used a decent amount of tread on his tire. So I'm really excited to see what Jacobs does. Seeing him rush for 1,600 yards, which, pretty much almost double what he rushed for in 2021. Look, 340 attempts is nothing to scoff at. That's a lot of wear and tear, but we've seen that he can be extremely productive, So the fact that we know that he can get over 2,000 scrimmage yards and, get the fantasy touches while still staying healthy all 17 games, that's huge. So we're gonna see what happens with Josh Jacobs going forward. But I think he's gonna be the premier guy to watch in this free agent running back class. And despite the fact I think Saquon Barkley gets the highest average annual value, I think Jacobs gets the most secure deal. And I think he's gonna rise really high in some people's rankings with how much unease there is among the top tier of this running back class.
Yeah, I'm really interested to see where he's going to go. He's got a little bit of that DJ Moore to him, where it feels like he's been in the league for a while, but like you said, he's just turned 25. DJ Moore hasn't even turned 26 yet, and it feels like the guy's been in the league for 5-6 seasons already. Josh Jacobs for me was really interesting, actually. Kind of my dynasty career arc with him is this past offseason, he was probably one of my most owned players, and I sold him off in pretty much all my leagues. And wasn't necessarily because I hated Josh Jacobs or was out on Josh Jacobs that severely. I just felt like people liked him a little bit more than I did. And so I was trying to get value where I could. My kind of piece with him was always that I felt like people were disappointed with Josh Jacobs because he never really hit the ceiling that we expected him to. At the same time, he was always kind of a stable RB2, a guy who could play, a guy who got volume, but he never really hit that ceiling because, he didn't get as much pass down work as we thought he was going to as early on. And just didn't really, get the volume in an offense that was working. And this past year, I sold him off in all my dynasty leagues and he exploded. So I like Josh Jacobs. I'm really interested to see where he's going to go. And I agree with you. I think he might be one of the more coveted running backs out there. Him, Saquon Barkley are going to be the top ones. But I think Saquon's going back to New York anyway. So it'll be interesting to see where Josh Jacobs ends up because –
That's also kind of the reason why I think Saquon gets the most money, but he doesn't see the most amount of time. I don't think New York signs him to a long-term deal.
I think they're going to franchise him and then sign DJ personally.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely what's going to happen. And I wanted to, kind of keep away from, speaking in absolutes with Saquon because really we don't know, but he is 26, almost 27. That tends to be an issue, even with a unicorn like Saquon. And I think that's going to be interesting. And I haven't seen a lot of people really talk about that. What do you do with Saquon, who was the number 2 overall pick in 2018, but might not be reliable going into only a second contract? Like this guy was supposed to be like an Adrian Peterson level type running back. Like, what do you do in that case? Where do you rank him if he goes back to New York? Like, does he stay the same?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, I'm pretty confident in Saquon. I had Saquon in a lot of dynasty leagues last year. I had him in like a lot of my best ball teams and it really paid off. Saquon's injury 2 years ago was a freak injury. He rolled his ankle. And so, it was so I felt like really getting the injury prone tag. And then people were like, oh, well, look, Christian McCaffrey's unbelievable. No shot at him. But it was like, oh, Christian McCaffrey, is all this and that, but Saquon's injury prone. And it was like, well, these guys have both had serious injuries. They both missed a lot of time. Saquon's ability doesn't seem to be in question at all. And neither does how the Giants use him. I thought that was really interesting. When Brian Dable got there, it was pretty much like the offense was built around Saquon. It was how he was running that offense. In the fourth quarter, Saquon was always the one who they were relying on. And I actually heard, I think it was on Pat McAfee's show, he was saying that Saquon had actually said that he thought Daniel Jones was going to get in the $40 million in his contract. So I feel like if Saquon had really thought that and was really endorsing Daniel Jones to get the long-term extension, I think he might understand that he might be on more of this short-term window. Of course, he's going to want the long-term contract to some extent, but franchise tag's not bad money for a running back like Saquon. And if he accepts something like that, I mean, he'll have to bet on himself again, which is tough, given his history in the past with his health. But I'm not worried about Saquon at all. I don't think we should hold it against him necessarily. But yeah, he's a guy who's getting a little bit older, so he's kind of in that range that we're trying to figure it out. But
let's shift towards the downside here, and let's take a look at your running back faller here. Who do you got?
Yeah, it's Alvin Kamara, and I mean it kills us. Kills you if you have Alvin Kamara on your dynasty teams. He's somebody that we've relied on year after year. He's a guy that has been one of the best players in fantasy. And, when those players get older, they tend to regress a little bit, fall off a little bit. He's going to be 28 in July before the season, which, isn't great news for a running back. He's also dealing with some legal issues that I'm no legal expert, so I'm not going to touch on those. But it seems like it could be problematic for his season because he seemed to avoid any trouble from that incident this last season, and it all got pushed back, which, might be coming up now. And this is the time to sell him. I mean, he still averaged like 14 points last year, but that's not really great for Alvin Kamara. That's, solid for another guy in that RB2 to late RB1 range. But that's a down year for Alvin Kamara. He finished 5th in targets, 8th in receptions, career low rushing touchdowns. His first 4 seasons, he had over 80 receptions. It was kind of a funny thing. It was 81, 81, 83. That has now dropped off as well. The last 2 seasons, he had 47 and 57 receptions. Over 100 targets his first 4 seasons. That dropped down to 67 and 77 over the past 2 years. So, I mean, we're just seeing it, and it's tough to believe, and it's tough to move off of him because you can't really sell guys like Alvin Kamara, Dalvin Cook, Joe Mixon at this time because everybody kind of knows what's going on when running backs turn in 27, 28. Like I said, the legal issues fall into that too. Saints also have a good amount of draft capital, especially in the 5th round is where I was taking a look at. Well, they have picks 29, picks 40, 71, and they have 3 picks in the 5th round. And this is a really deep running back class in 2023, where I think there's going to be a lot of teams that are just taking shots on adding an extra body in their running back room. If you can get like a mid 23 second for Alvin Kamara right now, I'm smashing that, like no question. And that's kind of where he's valued at, or the late second, like 209, 210. On trade charts, which is still, I don't think, bad return considering even if you hold Alvin Kamara, even if he dodges these legal issues, even if he bounces back a little bit, you're probably going to be selling him in a year from now. So if you can get something in the 2nd round for him, I'd be taking that. Be ahead of the curve, not behind it on some of these older running backs. The Alvin Kamaras, the Dalvin Cooks, the Joe Mixons. It's sad to see, but, they are falling off a little bit in terms of dynasty, and us dynasty players are a little bit ageist when it comes to the running backs. So Alvin Kamara is going to be my biggest faller, and as much as it hurts, I think it's the truth, and we've all got to face it.
Yeah, the only thing I want to say about Kamara is that I'm extremely worried that he draws the elevated use of the NFL's personal conduct policy, which can call for more than 6 games in situations that call for it. Considering the fact that there's not only video of him stomping another guy's face out, but there's also a video of him in the car. Yes, allegedly. There's also a video of him in the car after talking about it. So 2 things that don't bode very well for him. Definitely in fantasy, our legal expert, Drew Davenport over at Football Guys, shout out Drew Davenport. But, he opined that he's completely uninterested in Alvin Kamara at any level, whether it's redraft, dynasty, salary cap, anything right now, given all those legal ramifications. Not only that, just the fact that the Saints are in a terrible spot as a team right now. Given all the cap issues and the roster issues. So moving along to my dynasty faller at the running back position. And I debated a few different guys here, as you could see on the show sheet. I eventually settled on Joe Mixon, who just had charges dismissed from allegedly pointing a gun at someone in the middle of the street at a woman and saying, "I should kill you." Allegedly. So not great. Yes, allegedly. Not great for a guy who has a history of assaulting people. Probably shouldn't get caught doing that. Anyways, look, Mixon is almost 27, and he had a really down year. Well, not a really down year, but Efficiency-wise, yards per carry down to 3.9. He was under 1,000 yards for the first time since 2017. He averaged 16 fantasy points per game. Not terrible. He had a few decent games there, but look, the problem with Mixon is that, outside of that 55 point banger in week 9 last year, he really didn't look that great for the Bengals. Samaje Perine handled a ton more work as well. I just don't know exactly where Mixon stands in the Cincinnati backfield in their plans. As given the fact that they can cut him for some salary cap relief this season and maybe go after a back in the draft, go after one of the deep free agent class that they currently have, I think that Mixon could definitely be on the chopping block this year. And I think if he's not in the Cincinnati offense and he lands in an offense that's not as high powered, I think that could spell a little bit of a disaster for Mixon, as he kind of relies on how efficient that offense is to get down to the goal line, score at the goal line. Given the fact that he had a lot of red zone work last year as well, and was very good at it, given the fact that he is 6'1", 220. But I just don't know how to feel about Mixon. His rush attempts have been, trending down every year. Look, he had 60 catches last year. That is the saving grace of all of his fantasy upside, and I think it's really the only reason he finished inside the top 10 last year. So that alone makes it wary for me, since receptions are definitely not sticky for him, given the fact he's never had over 43 in a season before last year. But the fact that his yards per carry are ticking down and his rush attempts have ticked down as well, just doesn't bode too well for me. And his range of outcomes is kind of wild on Football Guys right now. He is currently the RB 15 or 14 in our consensus dynasty rankings, but he's as high as 7 and he's as low as 35. So, there's definitely a wide variety of feeling to Joe Mixon. Talent-wise, he's up there, but we can't just rely on talent for dynasty. And I have to think that Mixon has probably, it's probably going to settle in that RB 17 to RB 23 range, and that kind of worries me. So, a guy with his history of high touch load and high carries, mixed with the fact that he's possibly going to a new worse team and his own possible legal issues, given that the NFL doesn't need charges or a conviction to suspend you just based on their own personal conduct policy, have me worried for 2023 and going forward.
Yeah, you don't seem to be the only one who doesn't know about Joe Mixon's future. His GM today, Duke Tobin, was asked about Joe Mixon's future with the Bengals, and he said, "I don't know." So there you go.
Not the most ringing endorsement, everybody.
You are not the only one who does not know what's happening with his future.
Not the most ringing endorsement.
And I'll move on to wide receivers real quick, because I know we're trying to, get through this thing. We got 2 more positions to go. Wide receivers, tight ends. We'll talk through it. I got Amon-Ra St. Brown, man, who last offseason was a little bit more controversial than he is now. We were all having conversations about how does this affect Amon-Ra? Is this good for Amon-Ra?
Me as well.
Everyone was wondering about what's going to happen with Amon-Ra.
Is this stream good for Amon-Ra St. Brown? Do you think?
I think everything's good for Amon-Ra St. Brown right now. I mean, he finished 5th in receptions, 8th in targets, 10th in yards, scored 6 touchdowns. The man had over 100 catches this past year in that Lions offense with Ben Johnson, the offensive coordinator, who's coming back, which is a good sign for Amon-Ra. And Jared Goff, who I think is going to be their starter this year. We'll see what they do in the draft if they add a quarterback, but I still think Jared Goff will be kind of that bridge, even if they do add a guy like an Anthony Richardson or so. So that's a good sign for him. In Dynasty right now, again, on those trade charts that people are looking at, he's valued around 102, 103 range, wide receiver 7, which I don't think is crazy at all. I mean, if you were going to take a wide receiver in your rookie draft at 103, you might as well move that pick for Amon-Ra St. Brown if you get him, because we've already seen the production. We've already seen what he can do. And he's being valued kind of right behind guys like A.J. Brown, Garrett Wilson, Jalen Waddle, right ahead of guys like Olave, Higgins, DK, Devontae. So when you look at those things, you got to see what you can do, how you can take advantage of that. I mean, maybe you could trade Jalen Waddle for Amon-Ra Plus. I mean, that would be a great move, in my opinion, if you get a little piece with him. He'll be 24 in October. So, perfect age right now for a real good prime window in Dynasty for Amon-Ra to keep hitting. He was PFF's highest year 2 graded wide receiver last year with a 90.7 grade, high praise. And I asked on Twitter the other day, who is everybody's Dynasty wide receiver 3 after the pretty clear consensus of Jefferson and Chase. The biggest surprise answer that I was getting was Amon-Ra. I mean, there were plenty of people commenting saying, what about Amon-Ra St. Brown? Amon-Ra is my 3. I mean, that's high praise, man. Above guys like A.J. Brown, above guys like Garrett Wilson, Jalen Waddle, like I said. If he's right there in value, then he might be a little too expensive to get. I don't know that he's really in that next player right behind Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase. But even that we're talking about him there proves, how much he really rose in Dynasty. So I'd be trying to get Amon-Ra if you can. I have tried. It's tough. But he's a guy who really rose, and I think he's going to keep rising. We'll see what the Lions do to add to this offense. But like I said in the beginning, got their offensive coordinator back, got their quarterback back. So it should be fruitful for Amon-Ra. Tied for the record for most receptions in his first 2 seasons as well. I had to toss in that nugget. The other 2, Justin Jefferson and Michael Thomas. I hate that Michael Thomas is in that trio. We all know what happened with Michael Thomas since then. But Justin Jefferson, Michael Thomas, and Amon-Ra St. Brown are all tied for the most receptions in their first 2 seasons. So as much as people want to, wonder if Amon-Ra is elite, wonder how you value him, if you're not valuing him as an elite wide receiver, you're going to be late to the party and you're going to miss out on him. So,
yeah, I absolutely agree there. And with Amon-Ra, it's just, I can't believe that everyone was just so wrong on him, and myself included. I was just wondering whether he would be able to keep up this elite target share, and he absolutely was, and he's just become such a safe, he reminds me of Keenan Allen with a little bit more speed to him. Just such a safe receiver that can play anywhere on the field and is a really tight, solid route runner. And I think he's only going to get better as he goes along.
I think instead of wondering what Amon-Ra can't do or what Amon-Ra can do, we should wonder what Amon-Ra can't do, because the guy does everything.
He just doesn't catch that many touchdowns, and that's Jared Goff's fault. Moving right along. We're going to go to my riser at the wide receiver position, and that is none other than the Jaguars' number 1 wide receiver. It is not Calvin Ridley just yet. It is the one and only Christian Kirk. And look, we got people who are drafting Calvin Ridley ahead of Christian Kirk this offseason, per the early looks at Underdog. And I just, for the life of me, I can't really understand it. Over at Football Guys, we're pretty in tune with it. We have Calvin Ridley ranked as wide receiver 39, while we have Christian Kirk ranked as wide receiver 27. Now, I believe that Christian Kirk should be ranked much higher. Had a really good year last year. That was his breakout season. He's only 26, and he was the wide receiver 12 last year. Career highs across the board: 133 targets, 84 receptions, 1,100 receiving yards, 13 yards per reception, career totals in air yards, receiving touchdowns, everything. Fantasy points per game, ranked 18th. So, I mean, he looked really, really good for Trevor Lawrence. And obviously, it was a big year for Trevor Lawrence, building off of getting rid of Urban Meyer. And Doug Peterson has always been a receiver-friendly coach. And this is no different. Someone would argue that Jacksonville is absolutely the perfect place for him to land after he took a year off the year before. But Christian Kirk really looked good, and didn't just play the slot. He played a deep threat outside role at times as well. And it's not going to be a role that he has to play much in 2023 with Zay Jones presumably on the outside as well as Calvin Ridley. That means Christian Kirk can land the slot, where he racked up the 3rd most snaps from the slot in the NFL at 494. So that was huge to him. But he was also a huge red zone guy as well. He had 22 red zone targets, which ranked 5th in the NFL. So I think there's a lot of room for Christian Kirk to rise. I have him inside my top 25, and he's getting higher by the week. I want to put him inside my top 20. He's not quite there. He just needs to get a little bit more consistent. We saw him have some off games. There were a couple games like against Philly, against Houston, against the Jets, against Houston again, where he just was not that great. But we also saw him have these huge games against Kansas City where he was dynamic, games against the Colts where he was dynamic as well. So he's shown that he can be a very solid route runner. And everyone was laughing at the $18 million a year contract he got last offseason. That contract looks like a pretty good deal right now for the Jaguars. So I'm all in on Christian Kirk. I think he's only going to get better. I don't know if he gets all the way to wide receiver 12 again. I think that was a pure volume result. The Jaguars looked to pass a lot last year. Again, right in line with Doug Peterson. But I do think they're going to have a better team going into 2023. They might be able to run with the lead a little more, rely a little bit more on Travis Etienne or whatever ancillary running back that the Jaguars decide to bring in.
Yeah, no, I like that call. I mean, Christian Kirk was a guy that I didn't invest enough in, and I paid for it all season. So he had a great year.
I did.
That's good. My faller is Deontay Johnson, someone who I did have a little bit too much of. And I feel like we kind of knew before the season, a little bit of the narratives of it. These top wide receivers don't have great seasons with rookie quarterbacks. Started off the year with Mitch Trubisky. Deontay actually started off the year kind of hot as well. In Deontay fashion, where he's just catching a lot of passes and not doing much with it. But for PPR leagues, it was pretty productive. Aside from that, excluding his rookie season, he had lows this year in yards, receptions. He scored 0 touchdowns, as we all remember if you had him. Played a full 17 games, didn't break 900 yards. Not great. And still finished 7th in targets and 13th in reception. So, Deontay's a real one-of-one in that category, where the guy does just rack up catches at the same time, doesn't always turn into fantasy points from them. So right now on, the trade charts, it's being valued in the 30s, wide receiver 31 range. He will be 27 in July, right before the season. He can be had for probably a late first, early second, again, based on some of the charts that I was looking at, just seeing, kind of what the public's seeing. Plus side is really the things got together a little bit at the end of the season. Him and Pickett did start to develop some chemistry, a little outside narrative. I did just see an Instagram post with Deontay and Kenny Pickett working out this summer. So maybe they're trying
the workout narrative.
Maybe they're trying to develop a little more chemistry. I really do think Deontay's a good player though. So I feel like this year will be kind of his lowest season. He will climb his way back up. Just got to develop some more chemistry with Kenny Pickett. Hope Kenny Pickett develops as well. He's a free agent in 2025. And personally, I'm not buying Deontay just because I think that even people that like him, especially Dynasty players that like him, still like him. You're not going to just fall off of this one season. So I would be price checking on him to see really what the price is, but he's not somebody that I'd be trying to invest in super heavily this offseason.
I feel like I've been off Deontay for a little bit. I was worried that he wouldn't be able to produce with a rookie quarterback last year. And I don't know. Something about his game just seems off in the way he looked last year. It looked like he was determined not to reach the end zone. There was the game where he had that 55-yard catch and he just stumbled at the 1 yard line. And I'm just like, really? You're just not going to score on purpose? It just feels like you're trying too hard at this point. But anyways, I digress. We're gonna move on to my guy, and I think plenty of people on fantasy Twitter have been waiting for me to take my medicine on Gabe Davis. So here it is. You're only going to get to hear it once. Clip it, record it, do whatever you need. It's gonna live forever anyway. So whatever. I was wrong about Gabe Davis. I admit it. I was a fool. I thought Gabe Davis would take the number 2 role in Buffalo and run with it.
How hot did you feel after week 1?
I I
He
felt
scored the
great.
first touchdown of the season.
I felt great. I felt even better in week 5 when he had that 97 or 98-yard touchdown from basically the goal line to goal line, and I felt great, and then I didn't feel so good after that. Uh, I felt like you're a big Marvel guy. The spoiler alert: the scene in Infinity Ward where Spider-Man has his thing. He's like, I don't feel so good, Mr. Stark. That's how I felt every week last year, except for like 3 weeks because Gabe Davis was only good for like 3 or 4 weeks last season. I was wrong, and Gabe Davis's dynasty value has taken a massive freaking hit. But more than that, it wasn't even just the stats; it was his hands. He looked like he had stone hands last year. I mean, just not good on any level. And looking over his metrics were just not good. And the only one that's good is yards per reception and ADOT because he was the deep threat. And his drops number looks pretty good too. But yeah, just not a good season for Gabe Davis. It still had his best season as a pro, but he had so much volume it would have been nearly impossible not to surpass his numbers from the past 2 years before. Needless to say, does not appear that he will be Buffalo's number 2 wide receiver going into the season, despite Brandon Beane saying that he feels comfortable with Gabe Davis as their number 2 wide receiver going into the season. I would be shocked if they didn't add a receiver either in the draft or in this non-stocked free agency class. But shame on the Bills for thinking that they could just skate by and, let Gabe Davis be the hero because he just clearly was not, and I was wrong. Anyways, let's move on to our last category. Let's get into tight ends.
I think we needed a silence after that, so I enjoyed it. My tight end riser, Evan Engram, 28 years old, going to be 29 in September. Really not that old for a tight end. We've seen Travis Kelce go, into his mid-30s now. Not comparing them, but just saying tight ends take a little while to get going. From the most part of what we've seen. So being 28, not so bad in Evan Engram's position. Looks like the Jaguars are going to figure out a way to bring him back, which is huge plus because he can be locked up with Trevor Lawrence, which is always a good sign. They seem to have a really good connection. He had career highs in receptions, yards, and catch percentages this year. Finished tight end 5 in points per game with a little over 10 points. He was a little skewed by a 39-pointer that he had, but we'll take it at tight end either way. He was the tight end 1 overall from weeks 13 to week 17, averaging 17 points per game. So really won people a lot of money. I mean, I had some best ball stacks with him and Trevor Lawrence, and those Evan Engram stacks really hit. It was good to have, and I think it's going to continue because it's not like Evan Engram came out of nowhere. He's a former he was a first-round pick when he came out, and he had a really good season that first season at Ole Miss. Super athletic. He's just felt like he couldn't put it all together, and it feels like this past year he really did. And Jacksonville looks like they're going to invest in bringing him back. Like I said, Doug Peterson has a pretty good history with tight ends. Ask Zach Ertz how that goes. Gonna value the tight end position. Gonna find ways to get his tight ends the ball. So good spot for Evan Engram to be in. And trade charts right now, tight end 12. Which isn't so bad considering, like I said, finished in the top 5 in points per game. So you might actually be able to find him at a value, and I would really try to before he signs this contract because similar to, I think, the guy who Sam's going to talk about, but David Njoku signed an extension last offseason, and his dynasty stock went up right away. I mean, it was harder to get Njoku. You could people were asking for him in trades as an extra piece just because when those type of tight ends get locked up in a situation that you think could be advantageous, it's pretty good, especially because a lot of dynasty leagues are tight end premium. So you really want to have an advantage at tight end if you're playing in those tight end premium leagues. The cost right now, probably around a late second from what I'm seeing. And it really depends on your team. I mean, if you have a couple of late round guys or a couple of flyers at tight end, maybe you're comfortable with that. But like I said, if you're in a tight end premium league and you really don't have a guy that you can trust, tossing a late second if you have that isn't so bad. I mean, Dalton Kincaid's coming in, Michael Myers coming in, some of these good tight ends. But if Kyle Pitts couldn't really explode,
Michael Myers is coming in. Like
Michael Mayer,
real
yeah.
Michael Myers?
Yeah, you know what I mean. But yeah, I mean, I really think that Evan Ingram could be a good. You messed me all up with Michael Myers. I think Evan Ingram could be a really good target because, like I said, if he signs an extension in Jacksonville and is with Trevor Lawrence for the next couple of years, from age 28 like he is now to 32, 33, I mean, that could be productive for that 3-4 year span. Because of Trevor Lawrence and because of his coach Doug Peterson. And Doug Peterson shouldn't be going anywhere in Jacksonville. This is like the closest thing they've tasted to success in. Well, I guess they had the team in 2018 or 2017, the Jalen Ramsey team. But
Like Bortles.
I digress. yeah. Blink of the year, baby.
Alien.
Yeah, so that's my riser right there, Evan Ingram. He might be priced out a little too high based off his rise this past year. You might not want to pay that price for him, but again, I think it could be worth it given the tight end landscape.
Yeah, I want to be real quick with this. As the chief hater of Evan Ingram, I am kind of shocked that he had such a good year, and I do think that if he decides to stay in Jacksonville and if they're able to work out a deal, that's a really good place for him to go. And I think he's better off staying in Jacksonville than going anywhere else for his fantasy success.
Did you see, I think it was yesterday or 2 days ago, there was an Evan Ingram tweet from the Jacksonville page about his year.
Yes.
And he commented
I thought they released the news early.
Thought it was the announcement. And I think today, I don't know who reported it, but there was a report that they will be bringing him back, whether that's the franchise tag or a long-term extension. So we'll see.
Good. I want to talk about the guy who should be on everybody's board. And I was big on this last year, and I said that you should draft. Obviously, I said you should draft Kyle Pitts very high, but I also said you should draft Dallas Goedert really high last year, and that worked out to an extent. He would have finished in the top tier tight ends had he not missed some time after Washington tried to murder him. But my riser for Dynasty this year. And look, I mean, this is no different than really last year. I was on him too. It's my boy David Njoku. And look, he's coming off his first year with Deshaun Watson. It's a big thing. And Watson wasn't great, but Njoku is still the red zone guy for this Cleveland Browns team. And he will continue to be, given the fact that he just signed a brand new 4-year extension with them last summer. So that's huge as well. 4 years, $56 million. It's a lot of money, guys. 20 red zone targets last year. That ranked second in the NFL among tight ends. He had 8 deep targets, which ranked 8th among tight ends. He saw 80 targets, which is getting right up there in that elite range for the position. I think David Njoku is really going to be that guy for this Cleveland Browns team going forward. Now, we saw Amari Cooper step up and be the wide receiver one that everyone knew he could be, except for the Cowboys when they traded him away for only a 5th-round pick last summer. That's on you, Jerry. And we also saw Donovan Peoples-Jones develop into, a pretty reliable option for, a good portion of last season as well. So it only makes sense that Njoku steps in as the 3rd target for this team. And look, this is Deshaun Watson we're talking about. When he was in Houston, he targeted the tight end at a very high rate, and he's thrown nearly a quarter of his career touchdown passes to the tight end position, which is above average. So this is, Deshaun Watson and David Njoku showed that they were, bonding together really quickly last year. And I think it's going to continue going forward as they have a full offseason to train with each other now that Watson is no longer barred from practicing with the team. So Njoku is going to be my guy for 2023. He's currently, ranked around tight end 8, tight end 9 in Dynasty. I think he should be all the way up at tight end 6 or 5. I mean, right now, Football Guys consensus: Mark Andrews, Kyle Pitts, Travis Kelce, TJ Hawkinson. That's your clear top tier. But, Goddard, Kittle, Freiermuth, and Njoku. Goddard and Njoku should be in a tier of their own across from all the other tight ends as the guys who are most likely to break into that top tier going forward. So I do think that Njoku is really going to be a strong dynasty play going forward.
Yeah, I really like Njoku. I have him on a lot of my dynasty teams. Like I said, last offseason was really interesting. I mean, when he signed that extension, things really seemed to change in terms of what people thought of him because we were all kind of waiting for David Njoku to hit. I mean, he's a great athlete, came in with great draft capital, and had some good seasons actually his first few. But we were kind of waiting for him to come back. He dealt with some injuries there as well. But yeah, I mean, dude, for better or worse, Deshaun Watson is going to be in Cleveland for a long time, getting paid a lot of money, and now so is David Njoku. So I think that's a really good connection, and he's somebody that I do like investing in Dynasty as well.
Yep.
My biggest faller this year is Darren Waller, and he was hurt most of 22, so I'm not knocking him for that. He will be 31 in September though before the season. And he was kind of in that top tier. I mean, last year, going into last year, it was you couldn't mention that tier without it being Kelsey, Andrews, Kittle, and Waller. I mean, it was all those guys kind of being valued in that same range. Now I think that's changed a little bit off his down year, and I'm kind of going to talk about this a little bit of a different spin on it because I don't think Darren Waller's dead to us in Dynasty. I don't think he's somebody who I wouldn't want on my team, especially like I said, if you're playing in Dynasty leagues, tight end premium, Darren Waller could be a game breaker when he's fully healthy and when he's going. And as well, just as well as that, Josh McDaniels said that he has big plans for Darren Waller in the future. So it looks like he's staying in Las Vegas. If he's going to stay there as well, I do think the Raiders are adding a veteran quarterback, whether that be Aaron Rodgers, whether that be Jimmy Garoppolo, somebody who they're bringing in. And if Darren Waller is going to be there and he's going to be healthy, he's going to command targets because that's what Darren Waller does. Did take a little bit of a hit with Devontae Adams coming in, but I still think he can be productive given the value. Right now, you can get him on, referencing these trade charts, late second, man, like 210, 212. If you're a win now team who is like your weakness is tight end, I mean, I would be asking questions about Darren Waller for sure, the Darren Waller owner, because he might be a little frustrated after this past year. So you might actually be able to get him at a good value right before he bounces back. I mean, imagine you make a trade for Darren Waller, today or tomorrow, and Aaron Rodgers gets traded to the Raiders. I mean, stock's going to go way up. You can even move him again for something else if you need to. So he's not somebody that I'm, heavily invested in. I really don't have much Darren Waller, but he's another player that I think the value's fallen to a point where I'd be asking questions and seeing what you can get him for.
Yeah, I think, and I was talking about Waller with someone yesterday, and I was thinking that Waller's value is just so injury depressed that, again, it's like Russ. It's someone that just can't get any lower at this point. Like, he's had 2 injury-plagued seasons. He doesn't have a quarterback right now. His value is not getting any lower. Like, you should be going after him at the lowest point. And that's kind of what this is for, is to kind of determine of those fallers, like who's worth going after and who's just going to keep tumbling. Guys like Russ and Waller are prime for bounce backs, but guys like Alvin Kamara could just keep tumbling down. And there's one guy who I'm not quite sure where to place him in this range yet. I do think he's closer to tumbling than he is to be at his lowest point, and unfortunately, is Dawson Knox. It's kind of nuts, given how highly we thought of the Bills' passing room in recent years, and we were drafting Dawson Knox as a top 10, top 9 tight end last year. I know I was, at the very least. But Knox was just not good in 2022. He finished as the tight end 14 in fantasy points per game, averaging 9 points per game. It's not what we want to see in a tight end, especially not after you just posted a ridiculously unrepeatable season in terms of efficiency, which Knox did. And obviously, look, he just dropped across the board everything in 2022. He played the same amount of games, but he dropped in targets, he dropped in reception, he dropped in receiving yards, he dropped in yards per reception, he dropped in air yards, he dropped in receiving touchdowns, and he dropped in fantasy points per game. So he just dropped everything across the board, and it really wasn't good to see. Josh Allen just did not want to go to him in his first season without Brian Daboll. Now, I don't know if that's a pure result of Daboll leaving to be the head coach in New York, or it's just Knox was just due to regress. I personally think he was just due to regress because he just posted an unsustainable 2021 season. 9 touchdowns on 49 receptions was always going to be nearly impossible to replicate. I didn't imagine that he would be borderline unusable for half the season, which he was. He had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 games with 2 or less catches. And even in the rest of them, he only surpassed 4 catches twice. So just not great on all levels. Just wasn't running a lot of routes as well. And he would have some stretches where Josh Allen just didn't look his way at all. And that really worries me in terms of Dynasty. And that's kind of reflected in our Dynasty rankings over Football Guys. He's sitting at tight end 15. He's bracketed by guys like Greg Dulcich and Chigoziem Okonkwo and Gerald Everett and Trey McBride. I think I would rather have all those guys over Dawson Knox in Dynasty right now. And I don't know if that's much of a stretch. I think he should be more down towards the late teens, possibly 20 in Dynasty. And I'm not sold. I don't know what it is. So, his profile is so great, very athletic. 85th percentile in 40-yard dash, 87th in speed score. I mean, he's only 26, and he fits like every comparable that you really want to see in an athletic pass catching tight end. It's just doesn't look like he's turning a corner. It just looks like he's going to tumble down a little further. So that worries me, and that makes me very skittish.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally get that. I mean, the touchdowns are never going to be that sticky, and he doesn't seem to be too much of a target earner, honestly. Yeah. So, and especially in an offense.
2 wrongs, make another wrong.
Yeah. So
that is all we got in terms of Dynasty risers and fallers. I mean, I didn't expect it to go this long, but man, as always, we have a ton to talk about. We have a ton to say to each other. But I did want to touch on something because it is Combine Week. So I figured we would end the show with a little, thought exercise. And this is organic from both of us. Neither of us have any notes written down on this at all. And I just wanted to kind of, talk about the Combine. What are you looking to see from the Combine that starts tomorrow?
Well, honestly, the first thing that came to my mind when you were bringing it up is not necessarily something that's going to change too much of my stock in this player or too much. It's not going to be too groundbreaking, but I'm just interested to see Anthony Richardson run. A lot of these Russian quarterbacks, the real athletic ones we've seen in the past, 5-6 years or so, they don't run at the Combine. I mean, I'd love to see what Lamar Jackson's 40 is or what Justin Fields' 40 is or some of these guys, but they haven't run in the past because they haven't needed to, and everyone knows they're fast. I believe Anthony Richardson is running the 40, and I think that the prop went down from 4.5 to 4.4, which is interesting because I think that there's a possibility that he could run around the 4.4s and at 230 plus pounds. That'll be really interesting to see. Shout out, I saw Eric Froton from NBC Sports talking about that today, and it got me really excited because I was thinking that's something that, again, we know he's fast. We know he's athletic. It's not going to be any groundbreaking thing if he does run fast. At the same time, I want to see that happen. And of course, Bryce Young, everyone's interested to see what he's going to weigh in at, what he's going to measure at. So that'll be interesting in terms of the receivers. It'll be fun to see kind of how those guys run as well. JSN's been somebody in the past who people have said he doesn't really have that game-breaking speed, doesn't seem to have that top-level speed, so that'll be interesting to see. We got a question down here from Vaporwire. A big board draft a day keeps the doctor away, baby. You got to be drafting those as much as possible.
The answer on this specific show is no, but we will be definitely mixing some big board videos in throughout the week. Jay and I are gonna pre-record a couple drafts, and we're gonna put them out live so that you guys can follow along with them here and there. But we'll definitely fit in some big board stuff. Go along. We're definitely looking forward to some Underdog ever since I got Jay addicted last summer. But, go back to what I want to see for the Combine. I'm really interested to see what some of these running backs run during the 40 as well. Guys like Izzy Abanikanda, Kenny McIntosh, Jahmyr Gibbs, if he plans to run. I'm really interested in that because we see the 40-yard dash time affect these running backs a lot more than other players. do in terms of draft stock. Like we saw Kyron Williams' draft stock go from being a top 3 running back to being out of the top 10 completely due to the fact that he ran a 4.7 last year. So I'm really interested to see what they run. Everyone's been buzzing about this Monty Conda kid out of Pittsburgh. He had some hugely productive games last season, and I'm interested to see if he runs in the 4.3 range, like our good buddy Derek Brown has told me that he'll run, and a few other players as well. But that is going to be it for us, guys. I am Sam Wagman. You can find me on Twitter at Swagman95. Working on all my stuff over at Vegas Insider as well as Football Guys. And Jay, where can everyone find you at?
You can find me at Jay Arst, first and last name there. And like I said, man, a big board draft today keeps the doctor away. Go support Underdog. We love Underdog. And
use code HFF when you sign up, and that'll be in the description as well. Thank you guys for tuning in. We appreciate you coming back. We will be back next week as we do a couple of interesting things for you as well. One of the interesting things we have is we're going to do a little bit of a free agency primer, breaking down some of the thoughts that we have. And then week after that, we got a Dynasty rookie mock coming up with our buddy Kevin Coleman from Football Guys. Thank you guys for tuning in. We'll see you next week.